Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Facebook Live on Education, Health and Care Plans and Tribunals. There we go. Hi, my name is Hannah Morris and I'm an educational psychologist. Thanks for joining this evening. I've been working for 14 years and have specialisms in dyscalculia, looked after children and ADHD. But I want to put together this Facebook Live because so often clients ask me about EHCPs and tribunals, and I know they can be really stressful and confusing processes to go through. So I'm really looking forward to welcoming Dr. Michael Hymans in a little while, and we're looking forward to what we hope will be an interesting and insightful evening for you all. So please make yourself comfortable. It will be great to know who's joined us this evening. Perhaps you're a parent or an educator, so drop a note in the comments. I'd love to know the age of your children or the children you work with. Maybe you'd like to share where you're joining us from, and how are you feeling this evening? Hit those emojis, and we will be getting started with going through some questions and answers shortly. Hello, if you have just joined us, I'm Hannah Morris, an educational psychologist. We are going to be doing some questions and answers this evening with Dr. Michael Hymans, looking at education, health and care plan assessments and tribunals. Okay, so we've had quite a few questions come in already, which is wonderful. We are going to try to get through as many as we can. But do feel free to still comment with further questions if you have any, and any that we can't get to while we're live, we will reply to in the comments afterwards. Also, this session will be available to watch after we finish, so you're welcome to share it with any friends, anyone you think might find it helpful. I have posted a link in the event itself that explains the timescales for EHCPs and tribunal processes. And again, I'll post this in the comments afterwards. It's in the discussion section of this event post. So I thought that might be helpful for some of you. Okay, so let's have a look and see who is joining us this evening. So welcome Angela and Lisa. It's great that you're with us. We've got some educators here, some experienced practitioners, and Angela, you're a parent of an amazing autistic girl. So welcome for joining us this evening. Please do make yourself comfortable, get yourself a hot drink. We're all tired at the moment, I know, whether we're homeschooling, you're trying to online teach, it's tough. So make yourself comfortable whilst we're going to be having our discussions. Okay, so I'm going to welcome Dr. Mike now. Let me just share the screens. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. How are you?
I'm fine. And yourself?
Very good, thank you. I'm sure everyone's going to find your advice really helpful this evening, Mike. I'm really, really thrilled that you've joined us. And for those of you watching, Mike specialises in expert witness work. So this is his field, and he's got extensive experience as an educational psychologist, supporting families and schools in helping children with special educational needs and disabilities. So we're in really good hands this evening, and I'm really looking forward to discussing everyone's questions with you tonight, Mike. But before we start, I wondered if you could just tell us a bit about what's involved in being an expert witness.
Okay. As an expert witness, we have to make sure that we provide evidence for whichever court it might be. As this evening is about special needs tribunals, then I'll focus it on tribunal work. So we have to make sure that we provide evidence that is subject to scrutiny. We, as an expert witness, you have to be prepared to have the other side scrutinize what you've written, what you're saying, and they will ask searching questions about the evidence that you're providing. So that's the first bit. The second bit is the evidence must be independent. It must be evidence that you have drawn from whatever sources. You cannot simply write what a parent wants you to write, what a parent asks you to write. It must be wholly independent. And I think another key feature of the tribunal process is, as an expert witness, you cannot be a parental advocate. So the expert witness, certainly through the tribunal process at the hearing, cannot be an advocate for the parent, but simply provide evidence from a psychological perspective.
Okay, so a bit of a tricky balance there, because I'm sure when you spend time with families and get to know them, you know, I know from when we've worked together in the past how passionate you are about supporting families. But obviously, the most important thing is that we understand exactly what's in the best interest of the child, and so being completely impartial and independent is crucial to that. Okay.
But sorry, just to add, I know you told me not to say too much.
Go for it. Go for it.
I mean, I will act as an advocate on behalf of the parent prior to the process and post the process. So it's not as if I'm wholly independent of the parent entirely. And in fact, there are ways during the process to pass comments to parents. But I know that one of the questions is about, well, there's loads, but one of the questions is about how parents can prepare themselves. So maybe when we come on to that bit,
okay,
I'll pick up that thread again.
It sounds like it's very much a process. It's not just a turn up on the day and do your thing.
Absolutely, and many parents know that I'm not like another professional who charges by every phone call, by every minute, etc. I expect to be able to deliver a free consultation service until the point that I become involved, provide my advice, provide my report, etc.
Wonderful. Well, it does sound like really fascinating work, and it must be very rewarding. But I know that we have lots of people watching us today, keen to have their questions answered. We have some parents, and we have some educators as well, with a wide range of children with all sorts of special educational needs. We've got parents of teenagers, parents of toddlers, so quite a wide range here. And a lady here called Kirsty, who said she spoke to you only yesterday, Mike, for just 2 minutes, and she said, you honestly made, hang on, I've just lost the comment now, it's just, the screen has jumped. I want to read her comment to you because it was really lovely. Where's it gone? I'm looking for it, Kirsty, sorry, the screen's just jumped. Hang on. There we are. You honestly made her feel so confident, and so she's going to be in touch when you meet him. What a lovely affirmation. So, well, hopefully by the end of the session today, we'll have lots more parents and educators feeling more confident about these complex and confusing processes. So let's go on to our first question. So this one is about when to submit an educational psychology report. This parent who asked the question has already submitted their education, health and care plan request, and they are within the 6-week deadline, but they now have another EP report, and they just were wondering whether should they send this to the local authority now, or should they keep it in case they end up at tribunal?
Okay, it's quite interesting because for those parents that commission solicitors or barristers, there's differing views amongst the legal profession about when to submit an EP report as evidence. And I'm quite frank with parents. I make them aware that there are differences of opinion. My opinion would be, and I'll tell you what I base it on in a second, my opinion would be it is assuming that the parent thinks the case is going to go to a tribunal, even if they're not quite sure, it is better to submit the report once a tribunal hearing has been given and there is a date for evidence. The reason for that is if a parent uses a private stroke independent EP report as part of the process to justify why an assessment should go ahead, or why there should be a plan, or why there should be a change to the plan, the local authority is not obliged to take any notice whatsoever of that independent report.
Okay.
Now, once it goes to a tribunal, the tribunal has to consider all of the evidence in front of it, which will include local authority evidence and parental evidence, which includes the private EP report. Now, just to add a bit more, which I just thought of having looked at the question again, parents shouldn't worry about whether it is or it isn't going to a tribunal, because if parents assume it's going to a tribunal and the matter gets resolved before the hearing, and because it's going to a tribunal, there will be a private EP report. If it gets resolved before the hearing, then the hearing gets abandoned and the parents get what they want, and they get what they want with the private EP report, because the local authority know, had it have gone to a hearing, they would have had to have considered the report. So in a sense, it forces the local authority to consider the report and not reject it.
Okay, and obviously, although the local authority don't necessarily have to take independent reports into consideration, one would consider it best practice because they are supposed to consider all the evidence put before them.
Well, you say that. You say that. I mean, look, I can be brutally honest. I have no problems with this whatsoever. You say that, but I don't know how much information you sent out about me, but I was a principal psychologist for 21 years. And I was encouraged by my assistant director to find ways of not accepting private EP reports. So, and that was 21 years ago. And it's got even worse now because local authorities, are very, very reluctant to spend more money on special educational needs than they currently spend.
Yeah. We've sort of gone beyond crisis point, haven't we? And of course, there's no monitoring process, isn't there, of the decision making? There's nobody sort of looking at the quality of the discussions that take place at panels.
Well, and also, unfortunately, there are some rogue local authorities who say to parents, we will be having a panel meeting and to make a decision, and parents don't even know if that panel meeting took place.
Yeah.
And worse still, it may not have taken place and a decision may have been made by one person.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard and so frustrating, I think, especially for families and for schools. Time and time again, the communication is such an issue, and I think it's such a minefield for parents and schools to try and work their way through what's going on, what's happening, why is this decision being made, I don't understand. So thank you for that, answering that first question.
Sorry, there is just one other thing, Hannah. I would advise parents, if parents are going to tribunal, or they want to keep it as to going to tribunal as close to the hearing date as possible, they should ensure with the private EP that the private EP undertakes the assessment before the local authority EP. So, yes. I mean, one of the things that this is why this is so complicated, and I make no apologies for it. I didn't write the 2004 Children and Families Act. I wish I had actually. But one of the things about going to tribunal that parents or the audience need to be mindful of, it depends what you're going to tribunal for. So bear in mind that parents can be going to tribunal either because the local authority have refused to assess, or because the local authority have assessed and produced a plan which the parents are unhappy with, and there are different parts of that, or that there is a plan, there's been an annual review of the plan, and the parents are unhappy with the decision that the local authority has made. So those are the three main areas. But of course, the other thing is, unfortunately, if the parents are appealing against the local authority's decision to assess, use a private EP, it goes to tribunal, the tribunal panel order the local authority to undertake the assessment. 14 weeks later, the local authority produce a plan that the parents are unhappy with. They then have to appeal again. So it really is absolutely diabolical.
Yeah, it's a very, very messy system. And just to add, I think to what you were saying about making sure that if there's potentially going to be two educational psychologists involved, the local authority and an independent educational psychologist, part of the reason to ensure that there's not a clash is that the assessments that we use as psychologists can't be repeated within a year.
Absolutely.
So we're not saying you have to use an independent EP before a local authority EP or the other way around, but you have to be mindful that whichever one you choose to use, whoever works with your child individually first, if they do some assessments, then another EP can't necessarily repeat some of those assessments within the time frame. So just
although Hannah, to be honest, and I've been involved in this work as well, because of the pressure on local authority ed psychs, they don't actually produce comprehensive assessments. So what I'm sometimes asked to do, I mean, they will generally do a cognitive assessment, but because of the nature of the work that I do, and I should have said, by the way, my work is predominantly with young people with autism. That's just the way it's turned out. Very often, the assessment that the local authority EP does is inadequate, probably because of the time factor. And I often come in and do the rest of the assessment that the local authority EP should have done. Plus, I would argue that, in terms of the report that I provide, not all local authority EPs will provide a report in an EHCP format. So that's
we're going to come on to what we can look at that a bit more later on. But you're absolutely right that the time factor is very difficult for EPs working in a local authority. Just to give those of you watching an idea, I remember when I used to work for local authorities, I might have had maybe 5 visits over a year for a whole school, and a visit might have been half a day. And now in independent practice, if I add up all of the time that I spend on a single case, I probably spend about 2 days of time per child. So that just gives you a sense of why it's so difficult for local authority EPs to actually get into schools and do comprehensive work. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Thank you for that. We have had someone ask if there is a way for their child to have an independent assessment if they're struggling financially. So I know that Quorum have a legal aid service that may be an option for some families. Have you worked with them, Mike?
I do extensive work with the Quorum Children's Legal Centre, yes.
Okay.
And also, the other agency that parents can go to is, which I know you put on the link, is IPSE, Independent Panel for Special Education and Advice. Now, I'm not quite sure how I think I know what these agencies will do will be to get funding from the Legal Agency, LAA, and then find a psychologist who will undertake the assessment under the LAA fees. So in other words...
What does LAA stand for? Sorry?
Legal Aid Authority.
Legal Aid Authority. Okay.
So if I do work for Quorum, not that this is a big issue, by the way, the hourly rate is fixed by the Legal Aid Agency, and there's a maximum number of hours that I can record for report writing, but the rest of the time I use can be up to, I think it's up to about 20 or 25 hours.
So basically, through somewhere like Quorum, whilst it might not be what would be considered perhaps cheap and it's not going to be affordable for everyone, but it will still be a lot cheaper than going completely independent. So if anyone is struggling but needs an independent EP, is going to tribunal, it's definitely worth checking out Quorum.
I don't want to over advertise this, but there are some of us that do pro bono work. So I do.
Okay, you heard it here, folks.
And some of my EPs in private practice also do some pro bono work. So I do that, but not all of the time. But I do some pro bono work as well.
Yeah. Okay. Just having a little look through some of the comments that have been made, because someone was asking a question about what we were talking about before about local authority EPs, independent EPs. There's a quick question here about how EPs are assessing in the current circumstances they can't go into school. All EPs are working differently. Some, like I know Mike, you're doing virtual assessments, so you just have to ask the EPs themselves, and that'll vary in local authorities as well. Some of us, like me, are not working at all because we have children at home, which I know a lot of you can relate to.
I think it's, Hannah, I think it's important to say, I mean, I'm only going to speak of my practice. I'm not saying that all private EPs respond like this. I would add that even though I'm doing remote assessments, I will still collect information from school. I will still have dialogue with school about the young person's time at school.
Yeah.
Even in difficult lockdown circumstances, I will still collect information from school. You know, as I say, speak to staff, have Zoom meetings with staff, etc., send checklists in. So even though I'm doing a remote assessment, that's not the only source of my evidence. Plus, you and I both know we both use a parental referral form as well. So we will still be collecting evidence from a range of sources, not just doing the remote assessment.
Okay. A couple of quick questions here. Conchetta said, if a local authority has said that they've had a panel review, are parents allowed to request the minutes of that meeting? Really great question.
They are, but the local authority won't provide them. I put money on it.
And is there anything legally parents can do to pursue it, freedom of information, anything like that?
No. I mean, the only way parents could get minutes from a meeting was if they attended. And I know when I was head of service at a local authority, we had to say to the local authority had to say to parents, unfortunately, we can't have parents at the meeting because we have so many panel meetings that we wouldn't get through the panel meetings if parents attended every time. So what that links up to, by the way, it's worth saying to parents that if parents go to an annual review meeting, they should expect to have a written report on that annual review meeting because they've attended and they've contributed.
Yeah. Okay. And then another quick question here. What we were talking about local authority EPs and independent EPs, and Sinead is asking whether does this mean that she should get the school to arrange an EP assessment and not arrange a private EP assessment. It's not about doing either or. I always say to my clients, take any help you can get. It's absolutely fine for both to be involved. You just need to be mindful of who is going to see your child first, because if the local authority EP is going to do an assessment work, and depending on the independent EP, Mike has a wide range of assessments, and because of his the legal work he does, as he said before, he can complete assessments that aren't done in full and use alternative methods. Other EPs don't have such a wide range of assessments. So I would have a conversation with the independent EP that you are considering using and just discuss with them, and also contact the local authority EP as well. I've had a few clients in the past where I've just said to them, look, it's entirely up to you, but just be mindful if the local authority EP does certain assessments first, I can't do them. That's just because of how the assessments are designed. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question now. Oh, hang on, no, I'm not going to move on. I just wanted to say something. I just thought, in terms of following on from discussing with EPs and thinking about how an EP can work and support your child, I find I'm always saying to parents that it's really okay to ask questions. So I really want to give this message out to you, wherever you are in the process, whatever stage you're at, whatever professional you're dealing with, it's really okay to ask questions. So, you know, if you would like your local authority EP to become involved in supporting your child, yes, they may have a relationship with your school and a process with the school in terms of how that happens. But if you find you're sort of coming up with brick walls, it's okay to phone that EP team directly and ask what service is available for your child. And I've actually put together some questions. I'm just going to show them on the screen. One moment. She says. Just gonna find them up here. Hopefully you'll be able to see these. I've just put some example questions, and I'll link this in the comments afterwards as well. Just some questions that you can think through and think about asking when you're looking for an independent educational psychologist, or hoping to that a local authority EP will become involved. And if you do work in education, any schools, if you haven't had an EP visit you for a long time, do keep those lines of communication open. Perhaps you can ask them, if the EP can't visit in person, what can they offer? And Mike, you'll be able to correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that according to the Special Education Needs Code of Practice, once an education, health and care plan is requested, the local authority EP has to become involved by law.
Yes, that's correct.
That's what I thought. So if you have requested an EHCP for your child, this is a great time to make contact with your local authority EP service. And you could even put in writing some of the questions that you would like answered. So I've just put those there, and I will, as I said, put them in the comments again afterwards. Okay, so the next two questions go quite well together. When would a child require an education, health and care plan assessment? And do different local authorities have different rules for deciding if an EHCP can be requested?
Okay, so first of all, if they do have different rules, it doesn't really matter. The key point is, and I knew this question was coming up, so I did actually look at the legal perspective. And basically, and I'm sorry to kind of come across as over legalistic, but the key point here is parents should be able to request a statutory education healthcare needs assessment if they believe that their child has special educational needs, may have special educational needs that may require special educational provision. And that really is the underpinning of the current Act and the very, very first Act in this kind of arena, if you like, the 1981 Education Act. That's how special educational needs are described in law. However, in a more friendly way, the best way of thinking about it for parents is, if you believe your child has special educational needs, how can you demonstrate that? Well, you might be able to demonstrate that because you feel that there are barriers in that your child's needs are barriers to him or her being able to learn, being able to access the curriculum, being able to keep up with other children, etc., etc. So your feeling is that because of their needs, they're not able to learn. And learn is a very, very big term. I'm not just talking about learning maths, English, etc., etc. I might also be talking about learning how to behave socially, learning how to interact with other children, etc. So parents identify some barrier to the child's learning. So that's the first bit about the special needs. The bit about the provision, if you as parents, or even the educators as well, believe that the school is unable to meet those needs, and the inability to meet the needs may well be because they're not funded, their funding doesn't enable them to direct more resources towards your child. It's not the school's fault necessarily. So that's the easiest way of answering that question. I hope did that make sense to you, Hannah?
Absolutely did. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And the second part to that, Mike, being that do different local authorities have different rules? I remember you've talked a little bit about some of the things that you experienced when you worked in a local authority. And I remember one local authority I worked for had a set number of hours that they would sort of have as sort of their guidelines as to whether, as a part of their decision-making process, as to whether or not they were going to agree an EHCP. And these hours were different from another.
Hannah, look, bottom line is this. I said I'll be brutally honest. It's illegal to do that because when a case gets to a tribunal hearing, The tribunal does not consider the local authority's rules or the local authority hours. What the tribunal does, it does exactly what I just said before.
Yeah.
It says, what are you presenting as the child's needs? What are you saying is the provision, irrespective of what there is in the local authority? What are you saying is the provision that's required? You see, the difference between a local authority rule system or a local authority system for managing finance and managing resourcing, that's irrelevant as far as the education law is concerned. The education law is about individual children, individual children's needs, and the resourcing necessary to meet those needs. So
in some respects, so in some respects, it doesn't matter if local authorities seem to have different rules. If they're not anything in accordance with education law, then it doesn't really matter whether sometimes there may be different rules, but actually what I'm hearing you say and what I hope everyone is understanding is that from the point of view of law, the only rules that local authorities should be using are those that come under the education laws.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's have a look at the next question now. So the question that's asked is, I've been advised to wait a term before applying for an EHCP.
Advised by whom?
Hang on a second. It doesn't say who the advice has come from. I know that a lot of parents I work with, they're often advised by school. And the question is, should I do this? Should I wait, or can I make it quicker? And what I was thinking, Mike, was that as a parent, parents can request an EHCP at any time. You do not need to wait, which is very much sort of the answer that I'd give there. And what I would suggest is that it can be helpful to see how a child responds to differentiated approaches, different resources, and maybe some targeted teaching sessions. And it may be that for some children they just need a boost. But if you're being advised to wait, then first of all, you don't have to, but if you want to, what I would recommend is asking whether it's the school or any professionals, what are they actually going to do differently in that time period? And crucially, how are they going to monitor the impact? Because that's really the only, the most important thing, and the only way you're going to really have a clear understanding of whether or not to pursue an EHCP. But if you don't want to wait, you absolutely don't have to. And what I would advise you to do is to have a look. I know you mentioned IPSI earlier, Mike. It's funny, I call it IPSIA. It's funny how people call the different acronyms, but there's IPSI here, which is an independent organisation. Lots of guidance, information on your child's rights. They've got example letters and things. But also you can contact your local authority, special educational needs and disabilities, information, advice and support services. So SENDIAS there, and they can guide you through the process as well. But yeah, absolutely, you don't have to wait. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say is, if you're not, first of all, you're quite correct. I think parents should, and I know there are educators here as well, at least. But the point is, if parents have the concerns, then in fact they should be in the driving seat. The law allows them to request it. I think the key thing is for parents. I think what you said is absolutely correct, Anna. And parents need to have in their own mind, if they are going to appeal against a decision not to assess, why, for what reason. So in other words, they need to have the evidence about their child not making progress, about their child, about the school not being able to put things in place to meet needs because they haven't got the finances. So if parents are not going to wait, then they need to make sure they've got good reasons. And don't forget, I mean, for those parents with younger children, another part of the Education Act says sometimes you don't have to wait because the children's disability or special educational needs are so severe, and it's evident that the provision needs to be in place as soon as possible. So there are, for example, young children, perhaps preschool, with profound and multiple learning difficulties, or with some very, very severe and complex needs where waiting would not achieve anything.
Yeah.
So it's actually getting the balance right, really.
Yeah.
But the key message is, and I'm sorry to the educators, parents, you must be in the driving seat. It's
Yeah.
your child. You must determine what process you want to go through, when you want to go through it, and what you want to do. It's good practice to say to school, and it's not a slight against the school, that you intend to do it. In any case, if the parent makes the request first, the local authority is legally bound to consult with the school. So
Yeah.
whatever happens, if the parent does it first, the school will automatically become involved. So therefore, if a parent, you don't want to fall out with the school, tell them that's what you're going to do. If the school says, oh, no, don't do that, it's better if we do it, it isn't.
In an ideal world, it's best if you do it together and you're working together.
I was just going to say that. That's
but
exactly what
if not, go ahead. And I just wanted to respond to a comment. Someone's asking about can you requesting it to school. Just to clarify, you request an education, health and care plan assessment from your local authority. You're not requesting it from your child's school. Your child's school do not make the decisions. It's your local authority. And those websites,
by the way, for parents,
have all the information.
For parents, don't be fobbed off when the school says, don't worry, there's nothing wrong, we can deal with it. If you as parents believe firmly that they can't, for whatever reason, then in fact, you simply go ahead and you make the request.
Okay, moving on to our next question. It can take ages to get reports from different agencies. Any suggestions for how to speed things up? And what should parents do if they're worried about their child's well-being whilst they're waiting for reports? And I think we're talking here about reports from other professionals, maybe health professionals and social care professionals and education professionals, perhaps outside of school, maybe working for local authorities or the NHS.
Well, I mean, I'm afraid parents can't do a great deal, and this is one of the reasons why not just us as educational psychologists, as professionals, that's why parents pay for and go to other professionals. That is the reason why, because they're not prepared to wait, or they're worried about the quality of the service that's provided, etc., for whatever reason. That's not knocking the services. That's all to do with the pressure. So really, there's not a great.
They're qualified practitioners. They're qualified professionals, and it's not that they're not good at whatever jobs they do. It's that they just don't have the time and resources to be able to do thorough work or ongoing work.
Or like a lot of local authority ed sites of which we've both been, those professionals are hindered by what their profession tells them they can and cannot write, or for example, some NHS speech and language therapy services or OT services have a model of how they're going to deliver their service, irrespective of need. That gets thrown out straight away at tribunals. For example, a local speech and language therapy service might say, well, we only offer 12 visits a year.
Only offer a limited set time.
Hold on, we only offer 12 and we only offer 4 direct, the other 8 are indirect, irrespective of a child's needs. That gets thrown out of tribunal. Absolutely. Provided, unfortunately, the parents can afford to employ an independent speech and language therapist. But
this is difficult, isn't it? This is the trouble, because obviously, when children are struggling to access services, and particularly their emotional needs are always going to be affected, whether their starting needs, their main needs are to do with learning or neurodiversity or whatever it is that is causing them to have difficulty at school. At the end of the day, the emotions are the biggest impact, and what affects them at home and what we worry about as parents. So it is an upsetting time whilst you're waiting, and it's difficult to speed things up, but keep pursuing, keep the communication open. It's okay to phone and chase. And in the meantime, in terms of your child's well-being, there are lots and lots of free resources online, loads of free resources. And if you don't have the time to trawl through, I do have a Facebook group. It's called Top Tips for Learning and Child Development. I'm putting it out there just so that you know I'm always happy to answer questions. You can post a question in the group, and if you're looking for a particular resource, I'll respond and give you one. So there is lots and lots of free advice out there and things you can do to support your child if you're in an interim period waiting to access professionals. Right, Mike, our next question is, what can parents do if the local authority names a school that the parents don't want?
Okay. Well, this is another reason for going to tribunal. So when parents go to tribunal in relation to the plan itself, then the key components of the plan will be 3 sections. And this is what's crazy about it as well. You've got, I can't remember, I think it goes through from A to I, or maybe J, when in fact it's only section B, section F, and section I. Section B describes needs, section F describes provision, and section I is the placement, i.e. the school. So you can go to a tribunal against the local authority's placement decision. However, in order to do that, what the tribunal will do first of all will be to clarify whether there is any disagreement over the description of the needs, section B, the description of the provision to meet those needs, and then in terms of the placement, what parents will have to demonstrate is that the local authority school is unsuitable for meeting all of the needs, and here is a more suitable school, or that the description in sections B and F are not adequate enough to describe both needs and provision, and here's some additional information via private reports about what the needs are and what the provision should be, which makes the school unsuitable. It's all to do with suitability. Okay. Suitability in relation to needs and provision.
And being able to show that through the evidence. And another question relating to this is, does the local authority or my child's school have to provide education to my child while I am disputing school placement? Because I know that disputes over settings can take a long time, and this particular parent is saying that their child has been out of school for over a year. So it'd be really interesting to know if you have an answer for this one.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm getting an increasingly number of cases like this. It's not a straightforward answer. It depends. When the parent who asked this question said, "My child has been out of school for over a year," you have to look at whether the parent has decided, because the present school is unsuitable, to deregister the child from school and homeschool. That situation is slightly different. So that's okay. One aspect. And so from that point of view, if the parent is saying that the school that their child was previously at was unsuitable and therefore homeschooling, they're going to have to wait until the tribunal hearing. Some parents actually, and I've seen this before, and obviously it's to do with finances, I know cases where parents have placed the child in the school that they want via a plan, with the hope that the tribunal panel will actually accept that and name the school that the parent had placed their child in. The school,
a school that the parent is paying for,
yeah,
like an independent specialist school.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's right. And so that's happened on a number of occasions. In fact, I contributed towards winning a tribunal only last week in relation to something like that. Now, if a child is currently in a school, the process hasn't been completed to produce a plan, but the parents are of the opinion that the local authority is going to name the same school or name a school that they don't want, then again, it depends whether the local authority are going to name a different school, but still a school that the parent doesn't want, or whether or not they're going to name the same school where the child's at.
Very individual to each case.
It's not a simple answer.
No.
But what I would say to parents is, thinking back to the last question, think about the mental health and well-being of your child in terms of being at the school. Given my client base, which is heavily autistic based, if the child with autism, if their associated difficulties, particularly anxiety and sensory processing, is making life at school hell, then what parents will often do will be to deregister them and homeschool them, because they believe their child's mental health and well-being is suffering. And I do lots of that work. So it's not a straightforward answer.
No. Is there a provision if a parent wants to, says that it's not safe for my child to go into school, it's detrimental to their mental health, but I don't want to deregister them? Is there a provision, an alternative provision that the local authority legally have to provide?
No, the only first of all, what I would do is I would advise parents to go to their GP and get their GP to write a letter to have their child off school on health reasons. So, for example, a crazy parallel, but child breaks their leg and can't go to school. So that's the example. So that's a possibility. So I recommend to parents, go to their GP, get their GP to sign the child off for medical / mental health reasons. So that's the best way of doing it.
And what sort of provision would be provided? I've heard of some children accessing tuition centres or resources like that.
What a local authority is legally bound to provide a minimum of 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week.
Okay.
So what a local authority, now that normally applies to youngsters who get permanently excluded and there's nowhere for them to go. Okay. But of course, local authorities get around that now by having pupil referral units which take excluded pupils. So so I would strongly recommend parents go to their GP if there are mental health reasons for not being at school.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful tip there. Thank you, Mike. We've had a few questions on how lockdown has. Hang on a minute. I think I've put the wrong question up there, haven't I? There we go. Yeah, had a few questions on how lockdown has impacted on the EHCP process and whether new requests can be started at the moment.
Okay, yes, they can. And in fact, for parents who don't know, the tribunal process is now all remote. So everything happens remotely. And because the panel also accept remote assessments from local authority EHCPs or from private EHCPs, so the process can continue as normal. And bear in mind what I said in answer to a previous question. If I'm doing a remote assessment, I will still collect evidence from school anyway. So I would advise parents not to say, oh, we'll wait till lockdown is finished before doing anything. If there is a history, if there is a long history of SEN difficulties, special educational needs difficulties, then don't wait, start it now.
Okay, thank you. While we're on the subject, I just wanted to share with everyone that I've made one of my online training sessions for schools free whilst we are in lockdown. So if you're in education, it's a half-day training on how to support children with trauma, bereavement and loss, suitable for anyone in early years, primary or secondary settings, and it's available at Studio TV. So you can see the link there on the screen. It is completely free during lockdown, so please do go and have a look, and there's lots of tips there. Share it with your school. We're all being affected at the moment, so skill yourself up if you're an educator. Share it with your child's school, if you are worried about how your child is going to settle back in when schools reopen. There's loads of tips, loads of resources. And also, I've recorded a free video for parents and carers with tips on supporting children's well-being. And this is on my YouTube channel, which is at EdPsych for Kids. So again, it's a free video. Take a look if you would like. Mike, while we're talking about training, I know you offer a vast range of training, and this is available through your website. But I thought I would draw people's attention to the fact that one of the trainings I saw that you do, which is really brilliant, is understanding and supporting mental health difficulties in adolescents. I thought that just sounds brilliant, and I'm sure will be really valuable at this time. So that's a training for education settings, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know that you run stress management sessions for school staff, and so it's so important that our teaching staff don't burn out. So again, the link is there to Mike's website if you want to take a look, and I'll put them all in the comments after the live session's finished. Just at this point, I'd like to say we did sort of, Mike and I sort of say, well, if we go over the hour, we don't mind going over the hour. I'm still very happy to stay talking. We've still got quite a few questions to get through. And I know Mike has kind of said he's not rushing off anywhere. I don't think anyone's going out this evening. But if you can't stay much beyond 9 o'clock, the session will be available to view afterwards. So if you can't stay for too much longer, do come back and watch the rest of it at a time when it's good for you. So let's move speedily along then to our next question. This is one you've probably heard quite a few times before. When appealing a local authority decision, what types of evidence are helpful? And do you have any advice on how to present our case at tribunal? This is from a parent.
Okay. I mean, really, it goes back to what I said before. The key evidence is to, first of all, make sure that parents are happy that with whatever advice they've sought from experts, from other professionals, that what they've got adequately describes their child's needs. And I just want to link it to an earlier point when you spoke and mentioned that parents should ask questions. I work in a way that when I produce a report, it's always in draft, it's sent to parents, and they can ask any questions, provide any comments on how I have described their child's needs. If I've got anything wrong, they disagree with something, they're not sure about it, then we can make sure we iron those out. So the evidence must be in terms of an accurate description of needs, and parents have got to make sure that they agree with, understand what the expert is saying in relation to, or it might be them that are saying it, what they're saying as the provision to meet the needs. And then the final bit really is in terms of whether or not parents want the placement to be in the same school but with additional provision, or whether or not they're seeking a different placement, whether that different placement is another mainstream school, or whether or not it's a mainstream school with an additionally resourced provision, or whether or not it's a special school. In terms of the placement, the parents have got to demonstrate with evidence that the current placement, or the one that the local authority is suggesting, is unsuitable, usually because it can't meet all of the needs, and there is an alternative which can meet the needs. So in a sense, the parental evidence, it depends at what stage. if the parental evidence is against the local authority's decision, refusal to assess, then they've got to provide evidence as to why there is a need to assess.
Yeah.
I go back to what I said before. There's a need to assess because the local authority have not considered that the child may have special educational needs and may require special educational provision. The process they've done to reach that decision is not adequate or accurate enough. So that's where now in terms of how parents present the evidence for the case at tribunal.
This is assuming someone like yourself is unfortunately not able to be there to guide them step through the process. They're doing this on their own.
Well, look, I mean, I think I said that when you asked me about the work I did right from the beginning, the key point here is that if a parent commissions an independent EP like me, I can only be their expert. I can't be their advocate.
Okay.
So if parents want ideas about advocacy and they can't afford legal advice, then they need to go to the legal aid agencies that we've discussed, Quorum, Sendias, IPSI, will provide them with some support. What I will say, I mean, you know, it's unfortunate in a sense, but the chances are that the local authority will front up legal advice at the tribunal hearing. A good judge will make sure that the legal representatives from the local authority don't bully the parent. A good judge will do that, but not all judges will do that.
Yeah.
And what happens is that the legal representatives of the local authority will at the tribunal hearing present case law to justify their case.
Okay.
I mean, I don't get all of it either, and I'm an expert in terms of the case law. So what I do when parents when I have this discussion with parents is to recommend barristers and solicitors I know that are not extortionate. Some do cost a lot of money, but there are some that are quite reasonable. And also I advise parents to contact my contact list of solicitors, in one case a barrister, just to seek advice about what their fees are, what they do for their fees, etc., etc. Or go and have a look on their website. Yes, it does cost money if you want legal representation, but I'm afraid that's the state of play at the moment.
Yeah. One thing we can add, Mike, in terms of the types of evidence that when parents are thinking about gathering evidence, perhaps earlier on, maybe they're thinking about requesting an EHCP, and they might be either employing independent practitioners or making referrals to local authority and NHS services. If we talk about evidence and actually the content of a report, something that parents can look for is that there is actually what you might consider evidence in the report, not just sort of generalized statements. You know, best practice, certainly as psychologists, we're always looking for multiple sources of information to confirm our conclusions and the questions that we're asking and the answers we're providing. So certainly when you're looking at gathering your reports together, do take a look at them and do see what evidence is there. Are there test scores included, for example? And I know, Mike, you've seen a lot of different types of reports at tribunal, and I just wondered, in terms of the eyes of the law, if there's sort of a couple of key points that you feel it would be helpful for parents to really bear in mind at any stage when they're looking at their child's report from any professional.
Okay, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, really. By a good professional will, to use a bit of jargon, will triangulate their evidence.
I was going to say that. They'll imagine us drawing triangles.
Yeah.
Training we do.
So in other words, when a psychologist reaches an opinion, they will base their opinion on the evidence they've got directly from whatever it is that they did. They will look at that evidence and say, how does that square up with what I saw in school, what the school told me, what the parents told me? If like I do, I get schools to fill out standardized questionnaires and I look at those. I can use a parallel, same questionnaire with a parent, same questionnaire with a child. I'm looking for similarities and differences. How do I explain those similarities and differences? What do those similarities and differences mean? The bottom line is, I, as an expert, have to give an opinion based on all of that. So I will say, to you, in my opinion, this is what I think, and this is why I think it.
Yeah.
And I mean, just to link up to some of the discussion before in terms of parents contacting me, if parents want to know what I do, and what a report looks like, not only will I tell them verbally, but I will send them an anonymized report so that they get some idea of the kinds of evidence that I provide. What I try and do is I try and match the anonymized report as closely as I can to their child so that it fits both in terms of age and also in terms of types of difficulty and types of need.
Okay, thank you very much. So our next question, this is a classic here, but certainly for me, I get asked this all the time. Will an EHCP guarantee my daughter gets the support she needs at school? And you're shaking your head. So I'm going to go in a little bit more gently and say, whilst it's a legal document, in practice, it very much depends on the resources available in your local.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Sorry, Helen, you've got that. And this is a mistake. Go back to what I said before. Legal test here. So let's imagine that the EHCP has been produced via a tribunal. Okay, and there is agreement that what the EHCP says, there is agreement between the parents, the local authority, because it's against the local authority, not the school, that what the EHCP says will adequately meet the identified needs. Now, schools and sometimes parents, and sometimes schools try and persuade parents this, schools will say, well, we haven't got enough funding to meet the identified needs. Bear in mind that the EHCP is for the local authority, not the school, to provide the funding, the money, to actually meet the identified needs. The second part of that is, okay, let's imagine that the local authority is given, I just make this up, the local authority has given the school 25 hours of teaching assistant support time. And that time, it says in the plan that number of hours should be used to. Now, if that is not put in place, then it's up to the parents through the annual review process to say that this is the plan, this is what you should have put in place, but it hasn't happened, then to appeal against it. So it's another, in a sense, it's another tribunal. And bear in mind as well, I use the term annual review, but it doesn't have to be 12 months. It can be 6 months. 6 months is probably a minimum.
I suppose what I was going for, Mike, was that whilst you and I know that in practice, unfortunately, EHCPs don't necessarily guarantee that a child's needs will be fully met. There are some schools that do a wonderful job, and with or without an EHCP. And those are the schools who are going to have a very positive ethos for SEN, strong senior leadership team. The staff are going to be well trained. But in answer to this person's question, unfortunately, the reality is that often parents find that they are continuing to fight for provisions over the years. And this is why it's such a horrible system. But what I would say is that the process of requesting and getting an EHCP will still give you a better understanding of your child's strengths, difficulties, and what can help. And whilst the quality of an EHCP, we'll come on to that in a minute, might vary, at least you will have a starting point for which to fight for your child's rights.
I think the point is, for parents, there is the plan, but it's more to do with the environment in which the plan is being implemented.
Yeah.
So what is it? Let's focus on, it's easier done this way. Let's focus on a plan in a mainstream school. Now, if the school in which the plan is being implemented is an inclusive school, it promotes inclusion anyway. It promotes helping and supporting children with special needs anyway, both for those with plans and without plans. It's more likely to succeed. Secondly, if the plan is about, a child with complex needs, with the types of needs whereby staff need additional support and training, provided that happens and the staff are responsive to the support and the training, and they implement the training for the benefit of the child, then it's more likely to work.
Yeah.
I think that question relates more to plans in mainstream schools.
Yes.
If it's a plan in a special school and it's not working, it's probably because the special school is unsuitable for me.
It's probably not the right type of special school for the child. Yeah.
But if the plan is in a mainstream school, in fact, one of the people tonight, Kirsty, said that she spoke to me recently. It so happens that this afternoon, I've had 2 1-hour Zoom conferences with 2 different sets of parents, and we were having this same discussion in terms of how will it work. This is not about the plan doing something to your child. This is about the plan enabling the learning environment to be such that your daughter will be helped to remove some of the barriers to preventing her from learning, and will help her close the gap with her peers, will help her start to make progress. That's what it's about. So really, it's not about doing something. The plan is not about doing something to the child. It may seem like that. The plan is about enabling an environment and the staff within that environment to deliver what's in the plan.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, it linked with this, another issue can be the quality of the EHCP document itself. So the question here is, how do I know if my child's EHCP is well written? So, Mike, do you have any advice for families and schools in how to ensure a child's EHCP is fit for purpose, and what sort of things should they look out for when they are sent a draft EHCP?
Okay, first of all, if they want a model, you put the website up before. IPSIA do a wonderful, so if you Google IPSIA EHCP checklist.
Pop it up again there.
Okay, the first one, if you Google that and then within there put EHCP checklist, they have produced a wonderful checklist about what should be in a plan. And just to remind parents again, you're only looking at 3 sections in the plan: B, F, and I. And if your child is in, really it's B and F is what you've got to look at. Now, I think probably, provided you're happy that the plan adequately describes your child's needs. So what sometimes happens is that local authorities try and group or use a label to group needs. So in other words, they might say, Sandra has autism. That's her need. Whereas what they're not saying is, how does that autism pan out in the school environment? How is it seen? What kind of restrictive, repetitive behaviours does Sandra display? How does it affect her social communication and interaction? How does it affect her emotional regulation, etc.? So it might say Sandra has autism and she has difficulties with dun, dun, dun. So that's an example. But
Okay.
of greater need is section F. What the provision must say, it must quantify and specify what the provision is. So in other words, how many hours doing what, who's going to do it, how frequently, when, and how is it going to be monitored? Or by when do you expect the outcome, which is linked to the provision, to be achieved? So it's very, very simple. It must say how much of something, what is the something? And words like so and so must have opportunities to, or would benefit from. Well, all children would benefit from. So what is it? What must the child have in order to meet the needs?
What does it actually look like? If you were to walk into the room, what would actually be happening?
What would you see? You would see the child, for example, you would see the child sitting down for 15 minutes at the start of every day to be following a highly structured and individualized reading program that's delivered by the teaching assistant and that's monitored by the class teacher.
Yeah.
That's it. So if the child has specific learning difficulties, then that's what it would say. 15 minutes daily. I know, because that's what I write. I write things like that. I haven't just made that up. I write things like that. So you're talking about, you're quantifying it, you're specifying it, who's going to deliver it, when's it going to be.
So as a parent, if you're reading a draft EHCP, if you don't know exactly what a statement is saying, then it's not quantifiable and specified enough.
Yeah. So those are the two words that parents need to take away.
Thank you. Just a quick question here that Tony has asked about children masking in school, and so school think that they're coping okay, but obviously the parents have an understanding of how the child is out of school and at home, and often children will have those meltdowns at home because they're not coping at school, and just about, or they were that sort of sense and the message that's out there that if the child isn't showing any difficulties at school, they won't get an EHCP. Tony, it just goes back to what Mike was talking about earlier, really, about that evidence, and actually the evidence doesn't have to be what the child is actually doing in school. Those professionals who are doing the assessments will be able to explore and identify exactly what's going on, even the things that aren't necessarily visible. So don't let that put you off and think that, she won't get, you say it's a daughter or son, I can't see, sorry, you're just your child, he or she won't necessarily get an EHCP. It all comes down to evidence that you gather and what you provide. So
although Hannah, having said that, and my suspicion is, just a gut reaction, it's probably an ASPE, an Asperger's.
It says rating, ASD and ADHD assessment.
Yeah. But the point is, a good practitioner will know that's a possibility, because not all children with autism are exactly the same, and will look for evidence that although the child is masking in school, what is that masking leading to?
Yeah.
So I think a key point is here, even though I would collect evidence about what's happening at home, bear in mind that the plan is targeted at the learning environment.
It's about the impact on the learning experience and the education and the progress.
That's right. But the point is, even those children that mask, there are still things going on at school that come out. So and there's still, so the practitioner can mention what happens at home, but the practitioner has got to say, well, how is that impacting on the child's emotional well-being and what happens at school? Does it mean, for example, that the child has not got many friends, that the child is not having building a good relationship with staff because they're having to behave in this way.
Is their memory affected because they're so anxious all the time? Yeah. They're not functioning well. And actually, what comes to mind for me here is that put the EHCP to one side, because if your child is struggling and the school are not seeing any of it, then some assessment work needs to be done, because the school need to have that better understanding. Because if they're not seeing it, then they're not going to be aware that they need to do anything and be putting the provisions in place anyway. So whether it's towards an EHCP or not, just having that assessment to get that better understanding and find out exactly what's going to help them at school is quite important. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the next question, because I'm very mindful of time. Let's have a look here. Right, we're going to have a look now at naming schools in an EHCP. And you have talked a little bit about this already, Mike, but there's quite a specific question here, which would be helpful, I think. This is to do with the timing of when to request a change in provision. So I'll just read this out. So this family is seeking an independent school for their high-functioning child with autism. They won't know if their son has a place before the deadline to comment on his EHCP amendment. So they're looking at 3 schools. And so they want to know, should they just name their first choice only, name all 3 schools, state their preference for type of school, and then name it later if they go to appeal and they think they are going to appeal, or something else? You know, you might have an answer. You might tell us again.
I've got an answer. I'm afraid it's not a straightforward answer. Okay. And the answer goes something like this. Assuming that the child has a plan, if the child has a plan, then the time at which placement decisions should be discussed is an annual review of that plan. And bear in mind that if a child has a plan, whilst a plan is mostly positive, what a plan does in relation to school placement, a bit like the old statement, what it does is it removes the application process from the parents. So in other words, it is the local authority that applies or consults with a school that they deem to be most appropriate for meeting needs, not parents. Now, the time to request a change of placement is at an annual review. You can't do it before. You can't go to tribunal to request a change of placement unless there's been a review of the plan. And the second half of that is, if you're going to tribunal, not only have you got to have a named school for Section I, you've also got to ensure that the local authority has been prepared to consult with your choice of school. If they haven't, then the local authority can be taken to task at tribunal. It's not a good idea to go to a tribunal without a named parental preference school and that school have agreed the placement. If the school are messing you about, you're not going to get that placement via a tribunal.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? There's no other way round it.
Yeah.
You know, there isn't. The only way round it, which is what I've seen happen, the decision was made a few weeks ago, is that the parents, the school agree, the independent school agree, and the parents make a placement and pay for it, and then go to tribunal to get it.
That does link on to our next question. We've had a couple of follow-up questions in relation to this. Both these parents have taken their children's emotional needs very much into account when thinking about where they think their children should be educated. So one person is saying, our child has an EHCP and we feel their needs will be better met at a special school that's independent. How do we get the local authority to agree to pay? And the same question, but the other parents feel that their child has thrived whilst being home educated for the last 18 months, but the local authority wants to name a specialist school. And I think your response, Mike, is probably going to be that it's about they're going to end up at tribunal having to dispute it in terms of how to make it happen. How
it
to,
goes, it goes back to what I said before. We're assuming the child's got, yes, from the question, the child's got a plan. So the only way parents are going to be able to get a change of placement or for what they want is via the annual review. What
yeah,
happens, just to remind parents, particularly those if it's a first time plan, what happens is there is an annual review. You should be part of that annual review. You can also submit evidence, your views, independent of the review. See, what happens at the review is that the chair of the review will minute what's happened, or someone on behalf of the chair will minute what's happened at the review, what's been agreed, what's been disagreed, and all of that documentation goes to the local authority to make a decision. And parents, in any case, can provide separate evidence to that in addition. And what the local one of the questions that's asked within the hearing is the current placement a suitable placement, or is the current, I'm not sure of the exact wording, is the current placement still meeting needs?
mm,
Yes or no? If it's no, then there must be a follow up to that in terms of what
yeah,
is the review recommended. So that's the way to do it.
yeah.
In terms of home, in terms of the parent.
Their child has been home educated for
Okay.
18 months and they want that to continue, but the local authority think that a specialist school is better.
Okay, so what those parents have to do is they have to request the local authority conducts an annual review in their home of the home education program, and then the parents then provide evidence as to why they want it to continue.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. A quick question we have here, which is how long are reports valid for EHCP requests and tribunals? I know you'll be able to advise on any legal timescales, but my thoughts initially is that actually any report from any professional, it's as relevant as it is in terms of still reflecting a child's strengths, difficulties, and what the provisions are to meet their needs. So it's relevant in terms of is it still true to your child? Is it still are the needs that are stated still accurate? Are their strengths still accurate? What it says in terms of support or interventions, are those still accurate? And if not, and certainly if much of any kind of report is vastly different, it doesn't really matter whether it's been 6 months or 3 years. It would need to be updated. But Mike, I don't know if there are any legal timescales in terms of when reports are being used for EHCP requests and tribunals that parents need to be mindful of.
I mean, there aren't any specific legal requirements, which is go right back to the very beginning of this discussion. One of the reasons why I said involve a private EP once you've got a tribunal hearing and an evidence date, because then the report will be as up to date as it can possibly be.
Yeah.
The second thing is, if a report is, I'm not even going to put a time on it, but if a report is out of date, whatever out of date means or is,
just
then
not a true reflection of the child anymore. Yeah.
Then the tribunal judge or panel member will say, so what is your child like now?
Okay.
So really, even if things haven't changed, it's a good idea to get something up to date that says, look, child was last assessed a year ago, 2 years ago, and things haven't changed, or unfortunately things have got worse.
Okay, thank you. Another question often asked, is it best to wait for a diagnosis before applying for an EHCP?
Okay, I mean, that question really in fact, this was one of the discussions I was having this afternoon with another parent. It depends, diagnosis of what, first of all. That doesn't need to be answered, by the way. It's a rhetorical question. The second point is that if it's a special school, especially if it's a special school, independent or otherwise, some of the criteria for admission to that school are reliant on having a diagnosis. Others aren't. So with a parent I was discussing schools this afternoon, she was having a dilemma about whether or not to proceed with an autism diagnosis in order to get school X, because school X will only take children if they have a diagnosis. So that's really the only reason for the diagnosis, is if parents have in mind a special school, it's an independent school and they have strict admission criteria about which pupils they will admit.
Okay, so it's very much depends on the individual children, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Mike, we've had a question come in about how the EHCP is affected when sort of the whole process of getting one agreed is affected when a parent wants to request a school that is in a different local authority to the one they live in. So in my experience, this does unfortunately tend to end up in additional complications, and you sometimes get disputes between local authorities, but I think it'd be really helpful if you could advise on what should happen.
It's not a problem at all. What all the parents have to do is to demonstrate. So you see the repetition. The repetition is deliberate.
Demonstrating the evidence.
No, because the repetition is simply demonstrating this is now the question of suitability. Parents have to demonstrate that there isn't a suitable school in their local authority for meeting the identified needs. But there is one in the adjoining authority. Therefore, they're making the request for that school. It's not the parents' issue about who pays, the debate between this and this.
You tend to sometimes get that's the communication that sometimes parents are given, and sometimes it's
deliberate. It's deliberate. It's deliberate. It's to stop them pursuing it. It's all deliberate.
Yeah. So it does on the surface present an issue in terms of, as a parent going through it, it can be a bit of a nightmare because there can be lots of surface arguments and disputes. But what you're saying, bottom line is, you're presenting your argument about suitability. Okay, thank you. I hope you're all right to keep going. We'll try and whiz through the last couple. This one I really do want to look at, because I think this is going to be really, really important for a lot of parents who've never been to tribunal before. Could you just summarise for us what it's like going to a tribunal? I think both parents and teachers would be interested here. So I don't know if you have to summarise that experience.
I will. And again, I'm going to be brutally honest. Okay. And for a parent, it is absolutely traumatic. Okay. I'm sorry, but it is, because you are so emotionally wound up and so emotionally attached. It's your child. You know what you want and you know what's best. In fact, I say to parents, let your emotions go at the tribunal. Let them go. Say exactly what it means to you, why it means things to you. And it, funnily enough, in the current climate with remote tribunals, and even in the climate when they were hearings at the Royal Courts of Justice in the Strand, where possible, panels wanted to see the child. And panels would ask simple, short questions to a child. Now it's easier to do because it's done remotely and the child can be at home. So the panel members want to see the child. The panel members, if it's a good panel, the panel will also ask the parents, so what's she like at home? What's she interested in? This and this. And so it's going to be really, really tough. That's why, and I go back to what I said before, if you can afford it, or even if it's a stretch, if you can get a legal advocate to represent you, it takes away quite a lot of that stress.
Yeah.
Okay. And in fact, if they can't, I know this is being recorded, so I have to be very careful. But it is possible. It's been known, put it this way. I wouldn't say I necessarily do it, but one of the things I said before, I can't be an advocate, but there is something called WhatsApp. And sometimes parents say to me, would you like to join a WhatsApp group for the tribunal? I say yes.
Oh.
So you can communicate where it's not visually overt in terms of what's happening. Sometimes solicitors and barristers sign up to that. Others are a bit I'm not sure, because it's you have to be very, very careful. But
Either way, it sounds like a horrible experience, and
look, I wouldn't.
What support you can get.
I wouldn't say anything different if it wasn't like that. Some parents are more resilient and robust than others. If you are a resilient and robust parent, great, but by all means show a bit of emotion. It's quite interesting. I had a telephone conversation with a parent only the other day, and I was having this same conversation, and she said, I'm a police officer, so I think I'll be all right.
Okay.
But I did say the same to her. I said, if you don't feel all right, yeah. Now, secondly, as far
child.
Pardon?
I always think it's different when it's your child. Doesn't matter what you do professionally.
Yeah.
We can't be psychologists to our own children.
I know.
Your emotions bubble over.
As far as teachers are concerned, a bit like other experts, be prepared to have your evidence challenged, both any written evidence you've given and any oral evidence that you give. I mean, I know that if the parents are being represented by a solicitor, that's what the solicitor will do. So if you're going to tribunal and you're an educator, you're going to have your evidence challenged in the same way I get my evidence challenged. And one final thing about the tribunal, having said all of that, judges will explain the whole process to parents and will ensure that parents get adequate opportunity to say what they want to say when they want to say it. And parents can request a break if they want a break. Tribunals automatically put in breaks. And in fact, during break times, parents will often call me, or I'll call parents. We'll have a discussion about how it's going, likewise over lunch, etc., etc. So it is incumbent upon the judge and the duty of the judge to explain the whole process to parents. And as I said before, if the parent is not represented legally, then a good judge will instruct the defending barrister not to bully the parent or to continually use case law.
And what's it like in the actual room, Mike? I know some parents might be wondering, is it like a big courtroom that you see on TV?
Okay, well, don't forget, as I said from the outset, these are all remote, so you're going to be in your home.
Which for now, for the time being, okay.
But when it was at the Royal Courts of Justice, it was all moved centrally, and it really depended on the luck of the draw. Sometimes you were in a smaller room. Sometimes it was a big courtroom. But you don't stand in a witness box. You're not giving evidence in a witness box, first of all. And a good judge, what the panel do is, rather than it be a kind of battle of words, what the panel will do is identify what key issues there are and go through the issues and decide who's going to present what. The other thing to say for those of you that are new to tribunals is that whilst there is a plan, an EHCP, or the suggestion of a plan, then what the tribunal process does is to have something called a working document. And what the working document is, it's in Word format, and it's a version of the plan which shows within it, in the key sections BF and I, who said what, who's saying what, what's been agreed, what hasn't been agreed, and what are proposed amendments on either side. And what the judge will do is the judge will go through that and say, okay, let's look at the disagreements. So this is about saying, where are there disagreements? Can we, through the tribunal process, agree? And, so can one side or the other concede or say, yeah, okay, on reflection, I'll accept that. And then what the tribunal panel will be left with will be those areas where there's disagreement, for which the tribunal will make a decision based on two things: the written evidence and the oral evidence on the day.
Okay.
And when parents get an order back from the tribunal, then the judge will simply say, this evidence was presented, this is what we made of the evidence, and this is our decision based on that.
How long do tribunals tend to last?
Okay, usually, most of the time, unless it's most of the time, it's an all day. Sometimes, look, I'm brutally honest again. Sometimes the local authority ensure that there isn't a resolution by the end of the day for the panel, and it gets put to a second hearing, or worse still, a third or a fourth hearing. I've been to tribunals that have had 3 hearings, and the cost on the parent and the cost on professionals is phenomenal. Now, a good judge won't allow that to happen. Now, just one final tip on this, a bit of advice. If when you go to a tribunal, there's a judge and 2 panel members, it means it's a new judge, because there are 2
inside information here. Okay.
If it's
a new judge,
if it's only one SEN panel member, then it's an experienced judge.
Okay.
But most of the time, there are exceptions to that, but most of the time, and new judges make sure go OTT to ensure that parents are involved and parents get a good deal at the tribunal.
Well, we've got Sarah here saying thank you for your honesty. Definitely a big thank you. It's really fascinating and wonderful to get that insight. And often I think not just parents but professionals as well, we hear about the different processes, but if you don't practice like yourself, I don't do tribunals myself, we don't really know what it's like. So thank you. It's been really interesting to hear you share that. Just wanted to ask quickly here. I'm going to ask you to try and keep this answer short.
Yeah.
But can the local authority refuse to include recommendations from an independent EP in their child's draft EHCP? Is there any legally? The questions are the parent is asking is it illegal for them to do that? They're looking for, if it is illegal, anything they can provide to tell the local authority what you're doing is illegal.
Okay, the only way in which a local authority can include a recommendation from an independent EP is when they're instructed to do so at a tribunal hearing via the panel.
Okay, so they don't have to.
No, goes back to what I said right at the beginning. Do not use a private EP to submit that report in evidence to the local authority. The private EP report is best submitted at the hearing.
For the tribunal. Okay, yep. Great, thank you. Rowena wants to know, how do we contact you? Here we are, Rowena. I'll pop his website on for you again. There you go. Okay, I think we've down to our last question. Mike, wow, you've been amazing this evening, answering all these questions for us. Let me just find it now. Here we go. What does the local authority legally have to include when we submit requested amendments to an EHCP? So if a parent's going to request amendments, what do the local authority legally have to include?
Well, I mean, what's going to happen? It's the same thing again. What's going to happen is the local authority are simply going to. They don't have to include anything.
They don't have to include anything. That's the answer.
Basically, the only way in which you can get something included is via a tribunal.
Legally, doesn't mean it won't.
That's right.
It often doesn't in the reality.
And just go back to what I said before. The bonus of a working document must, because this is when the evidence goes forward. So what the evidence that goes forward into the working document, this is what the local authority has to do legally. Okay. So if it's going to a hearing, then the local authority evidence is the working document, what the local authority is saying should go into the plan, what the parents are saying should go into the plan, whether it's agreeable. If it's not agreeable, the parent will be saying what alternative wording they want. And it's simply a question of whether or not the local authority agrees to it or not.
Yeah.
And that is what is submitted to the tribunal,
yeah,
for them to decide.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. We have run over, and I'm really grateful for you giving your time and staying talking with me this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Your comments have been extremely helpful and insightful, and I'm sure that everyone has found them invaluable, and we do really appreciate your time. So thank you so much. I've put your website up there. If anybody you do want to get in contact with Mike, he's always happy to hear from you. Thank you everyone for joining us, and so many of you have stayed with us, or we've run over listening to us babble on. So thank you. I hope you found it helpful. If any of you would like to discuss your concerns in more detail, do contact Mike or myself. I'm running a small hub group discussion next week, so you can find details on my Facebook page, which is at EdPsych for Kids. I shall pop that one up there again. If I just take this off, you can see, there we go. And just a reminder that this session will be available to watch after we finish, so you're welcome to share it with any friends who think might find it helpful. I'm going to pop 3 short feedback questions in the comments in a little while. Really appreciate if you could take the time just to respond. You know, we've done a few sessions before. We've both experienced with training, and I've done a few Facebook Lives, and it's something we're thinking of doing more of, so we'd love to hear what you thought and what you would like to hear about in the future. As I said before, I will post all the links to any resources or websites that have been mentioned. I'll pop them in the comments, hopefully you've had lots of your questions answered, and any that we haven't covered, we will be going through and replying to them. So do check back over the next couple of days. Thank you very much. Keep safe, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your week.